New evidence, new photos, a missing hour that investigators still can't explain publicly. The United Cajun Navy has just released its full investigative report on the Nolan Wells case, and this is raising new questions about what really happened on Horn Island, revealing what investigators maybe still can't verify. We're going to break down the biggest findings for you right now. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. All right, so you don't need me to tell you that this case, the Nolan Wells case, has been full of theories and speculation and unanswered questions. But today, we now have something a little more concrete. Maybe. The United Cajun Navy, the volunteer search team that was on Horn Island within hours of Nolan Wells going missing, they have released its complete investigative report. And what they found is significant. And to be clear, this is not the sheriff's office investigation, but you do wonder, are they going to rely on this in some capacity? So you have new photos, okay? New photos seemingly showing how investigators believe the boats were positioned. New witness statements that fill in potentially parts of the timeline. And there's this critical gap. It's a window of just over an hour that could hold the key to what really happened to Nolan Wells. Now, we're going to take you into all of that, but even more has happened since our last update on this case. There's so much that happens in the last 24 hours in this case. And just a quick reminder about what we're talking about if you're just joining us. So this is 18-year-old Nolan Wells, disappeared during a 4th of July boating trip to Horn Island, Mississippi. His friends returned to the mainland without him. The accounts have been that he chose to stay behind, possibly to talk to a young lady. 2 days later, his body was found. His family has been fighting for answers ever since. They have been asking for a thorough investigation by law enforcement. They've hired outside counsel, Ben Crump, to represent them during the course of this whole investigation. And now we are learning that some of the people who were with Nolan that day, for example, Warren Hudson, the one whose father offered a $50,000 reward for information, along with 2 others, Jack Spatalo and Morgan Seymour, they are now fighting back. They have launched a Give, Send, Go fundraiser with a goal of $100,000 to cover legal defense costs. In the description, they say they've been, quote, inundated with death threats, threats of violence, and defamation. They have been falsely and wrongly blamed by individuals online and in the media of either directly or indirectly having a hand in Nolan's death. Most of them could not even attend their own best friend's funeral. Now, an attorney for the Hudson family confirmed to Rolling Stone that this fundraiser is legitimate, that the money would be used to pursue potential defamation claims against what they called, or what he called, the online mob. And by the way, speaking of threats, and we've talked about it here on Sidebar, they apparently just keep on coming. The Sun-Herald reports that an Illinois man named Edward James Porter has now been charged with threatening to kill witnesses and their families in connection with the ongoing state investigation into Nolan's death. Allegedly, he told one witness he was going to, quote, come kill them, sent them their home address. He's accused of telling another witness he would kill them, cut up the body, stuff the remains into a suitcase. And this follows 2 previous arrests that we talked about, one in Ohio, one in California, allegedly connected to threats in this case. And then you have Nolan's mom, Christine Wonsley, who has not only been searching for answers in this case, but now she's pushing back. She's pushing back on a narrative out there that has been circulating, telling Don Lemon on his show that one of Nolan's football coaches saw him on the island between 2:45 and 3:30 p.m. that day and said he was, quote, perfectly fine, that he was not sloppy drunk. So pushing back on the narrative that Nolan was heavily intoxicated, that it's been brought up in several media reports. And she's questioning why that narrative has been pushed, saying, is this a narrative that you guys want to use? There was an internal MDMR email that we obtained that describes Nolan's alcohol intake as heavy. The Mississippi Department of Marine Resources shows they believe Nolan had been drinking heavily before he was reported missing. But the coach's account and Wonsley's insistence raised questions about whether that's accurate. And we should also note that the state toxicology report hasn't been publicly released yet. That report, along with the autopsy report, is all being withheld until a grand jury is impaneled and makes a decision. Remember, the sheriff's office is still investigating this. By all accounts, under Mississippi law, this is going to be presented to a grand jury, because that's a key point, right? The official state autopsy is complete, but the results are sealed. District Attorney Angel Myers-McElrath says that every death in the county that isn't natural causes or a non-criminal car wreck goes to a grand jury, meaning the report is not going to be public until that process is complete. We do not have a timeline on when that will happen. Okay, I know this is a 180, but I just have to call out a sponsor that really helps make these episodes happen. And this is for all of you business owners out there. I think you should really listen up because look, running a business is tough enough, right? Why make it harder doing things manually, relying on dozens of apps that don't really talk to each other? Well, that's where our sponsor, Odoo, comes in. So Odoo is an all-in-one business management platform with a full suite of integrated apps that seamlessly connect all your operations from sales and accounting to manufacturing, shipping. Odoo can automatically generate professional, sleek-looking sales orders, invoices, vendor bills, and it can automatically assign sales teams and send email updates through each sales stage and even use AI to pull reports that help with your decision-making. For manufacturing, their apps can sync inventory with real-time production and purchase updates so you never run out of stock. And when it comes time for accounting, that's also fully automated. Odoo can create invoices, track expenses, and even summarize data with AI to save you hundreds of hours. You know what the best part is? You can choose your apps and even build custom workflows so it's all fully tailored to your business's needs. Take your business to the next level by consulting with an Odoo expert today for free at odoo.com/sidebar. Now, I do want to get into what the United Cajun Navy actually found because they've been working on this since the beginning. Their report kind of gives us the clearest picture yet of maybe, potentially what happened on Horn Island that day. So the report includes a photo that I don't believe we've seen before because this shows 3 boats anchored side by side, the Palm Beach, the Triton, that's the boat that we believe Nolan was on, and the third boat labeled boat number 3. This is interesting. The report includes a statement from an independent witness, a woman who took a photo of those same boats and said when her group left at 7:30 p.m. that night, Nolan was, quote, nowhere in sight. There's more. Remember that audio that was released, the distress call that was made from the boat that Nolan was supposedly on or was on at one point in time? Not clear if he was on at that point when the call was made, although we've seen video back and forth that would suggest he wasn't. But remember, the idea was the boat was taking on water, and then you had these young people panicking. This call?
Hey, we're at the west tip of Horn, and our bilge pump stopped working. We're sinking. Can y'all please come? We have a membership.
Is there a living person, someone breathing on the boat? Is there anybody on the boat?
Yes, there's lots of people breathing on the boat.
So the audio had been later enhanced. People online were claiming they heard people panicking about Nolan in the background, though that's not officially been verified by law enforcement. And here is what is important about this now. According to this United Cajun Navy report, the Cajun Navy couldn't find any evidence to establish when the boat actually began taking on water. Timeline's important here, right? Remember, the friends are saying the boat was taking on water, so they had to leave, but Nolan apparently chose to stay behind. The United Cajun Navy is saying they couldn't come up with anything to confirm that timeline. So when did the water actually start coming in? And it's important to note that this report is an independent review, right? It's not from the state's findings. It's not from the sheriff's findings. The state investigation remains ongoing, but clearly we have a lot to talk about. And this is why we brought in someone who can make sense of everything. Joining me now is Alex Beer. He's a forensic diver, marine law enforcement expert who has investigated cases just like this one. Alex, thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
Sorry. Sorry. If you want to say thanks for having me. I sneezed right in your intro. Sorry.
No, I appreciate you having me on. Thank you.
You got it. So, Alex, I want to go through this piece by piece, and I want to start with these new photos that we haven't seen before from this report. So you have these 3 boats that are anchored side by side, the Palm Beach, the Triton, again, that's the boat that we believe Nolan arrived on, and a third boat labeled Boat 3. Now, here's the thing. The report itself says that these labels are source annotations, not the actual registration identifications of these boats. So can we actually find out who was on which boat? Does that matter? Talk to us about that.
I mean, you could, well, if you could get the registration numbers, obviously you can get the owners. It would be difficult, I would say, to get who was on each boat, given that, unless you have somebody that was on each of those boats testify to how many people they brought out there, who was there, it would take some corroboration from the people that were actually on board. And there's going to be no manifest or anything like that to refer to. So you're going to rely on witnesses that would say, yes, I had A, B, and C on my boat and X, Y, and Z on my boat, and this is who came out with us and this is who left with us. But that's through investigation. The investigators would have to figure that out.
And Alex, I want you to take a look at this. So the report indicates how the boats were positioned and how they moved. And they found that it appears in one photo there on the left, you can see the vessel they're calling Boat X anchored between boats 1 and 2. And then it's not present in the photo on the right. So you're kind of seeing some movement, a transition there. Why is that significant?
I mean, it's going to show, if these are boats that are in question in this investigation, one, it will show hopefully a timeline when the boats were there and sort of where they were in relation to the world, who may or may not have been on those as they relate to the case. And then a boat not being there would then give an indication, well, what time or roughly what time did that boat leave? And that will play into the timeline of the case. As far as how they're anchored or why they're positioned there, or, this was I'm sure if you had a much broader photograph of that area at that time, you would probably have 100 boats anchored along that beachfront that are just jockeying for a place to get in close to the beach to enjoy the day's what was going on there on that day on 4th of July.
And here's where it gets really, really specific, because the report includes a shoreline photograph that's believed to have been taken at 4:50 p.m., so 19 minutes after the Triton apparently left at 4:31 p.m. And in that photo, the photo known as boat number 2, they say it's no longer in the original position. So by 4:50 p.m., at least one boat had already moved. The report notes Nolan could be in that photo at 4:50 p.m., but, could be. It's not confirmed. And I guess this would go against what we've heard so much about the reporting, that the last time people saw him who were with him was 3 p.m., right? So I think that's significant.
It could be significant. Again, these are all, I think a lot of this reporting is still developing. I don't know that any of this has been rock solid confirmed that this is a definitive. I think as they're working through this investigation, they're trying to narrow it down. But again, that relies on things like pictures that have been given to investigators from the public from that day. And as they're combing through those photographs, they're trying to piece it together in a logical or more of a concrete timeline. It will take some time to do that. It's a little bit difficult. You have to recognize, is that the boat? There's a lot of questions. Is that same boat? Is it not the same boat? Is that him on it? Is that not him on it? They're working through that, and it's difficult because unlike TV, it's not put it up, let's enhance this, let's clean it up and run it. It doesn't work quite that smoothly, and most agencies don't really have that technology, and the technology is more for TV purposes. It's not as CSI as people would probably like it to be. So, but that's part of the investigation.
Let me ask you, just generally speaking, before we go to the timeline, how much does law enforcement rely on a United Cajun Navy report?
I mean, I don't know how much they in that area would rely on it. The Cajun Navy, to the best of my recollection, really sort of came about from Hurricane Katrina, which was a bunch of well-meaning citizens that had means and the ability to get boats out and help people. And I think that's great. Volunteer groups are good to work with. I think that's part of it. I don't know that it will be the key piece of evidence or the linchpin that holds it all together, but it's more information, and all you can ask for in an investigation is to get as much information that is true and factual together to basically build your investigation.
And here is where the Navy's report identifies the core problem, because according to the report, the last independently corroborated sighting of Nolan occurred between 3:23 p.m. and 4:27 p.m. So that's a window of just over an hour, and there has been no information yet to fill what is a gap here. So, Alex, based on your experience investigating cases like that, what could have happened during that window? How do you investigate kind of essentially a missing hour with, as right now, no public witnesses, right? We don't know what law enforcement knows. We don't know who they've interviewed, but there seems to be this gap. And at one point you're talking about a barrier island. It is isolated. It's 10 miles off the coast. But at the same time, it's not just a tiny, tiny island. It's a rather larger island. You have a lot of boats there, a lot of people, and you have this window of time. What should we be thinking about? How do you investigate it?
I think we need to be careful for all of the online sleuths out there that, the information that is currently available to the public may not be as much as is available to the current investigators. Those that are coming on, doing shows like this and doing other things are operating under what they know. That's not necessarily the same thing as what investigators know. And investigators are not always obligated, nor should they always want to, we talk a lot about transparency, but when you're conducting an investigation, sometimes you have to hold back information so that you're not leading other possible witnesses into conclusions. And so we don't know that that window is smaller or larger as of this point from the investigator side. But what investigators would do is continue to run down people that were there that day, schedule interviews, lock people into stories, and try and get as much down to that as they can. But the reality is that there may just be a gap there where you have 100 people are at a, for lack of a better term, a large party. Who's really paying attention to one individual person and sort of watching them? When, you know, he's doing whatever he was doing, you're not necessarily tracking all those people on a one-on-one basis.
And it should be also noted, when this report was completed, the investigation by law enforcement is still continuing, so things could change, right? And so this Navy report also notes something that's very important that I want to mention here. So they couldn't establish a, quote, continuous, independently corroborated chain from Nolan's last known sighting through 4:31 p.m. Is that unusual?
Yeah, that's not unusual. I mean, if you can imagine yourself at any large gathering, if you were plucked out of the crowd and then asked, could you tell me where the lady in the red dress that you see right here was at through the night? If you weren't particularly paying attention to that person, how would you know that? And so they're trying to take everybody's account. And then time is a funny thing, because if you're at an event like this or you're at a party, how often are you, like, unless you have someplace to be, are you always tracking your time? So that's not necessarily the easiest thing to nail down to a minute by minute account of any one thing. In this case, you're dealing with a lot of kids. They're doing whatever they're doing and having a good time. I don't know how much they're paying attention if they're otherwise distracted. So it's difficult. It is. By the investigators are certainly climbing an uphill battle, especially under the scrutiny and the public attention that it's gotten, that, you know, everybody wants answers, and they do too, but it takes time to try and figure that part of it out.
I want to circle back to something that I mentioned earlier. So according to the report, there was a woman on the island named Caitlin Burchard, who apparently snapped a picture of the vessels and reported that Nolan was nowhere in sight when her group left the island at 7:30 p.m. That's the screenshot of her statement above the picture. So, Alex, let's talk about this for a second. 3 hours, apparently after the friends had left, according to this witness, Nolan could have already been gone from the area. This is, I think, significant. This is significant. I think that 7:30 p.m. timeline, because a big conversation is, how did no one see what happened to him, even if it was accidental, or, you know, what the situation may be. How does that factor into the timeline? How does that factor into the analysis? Because it's one thing to say the last time we all saw him, we were with him, like, was in the afternoon, and now you hear this account about 7:30.
The last known person, the last witness who's saying that they snapped this photo, nowhere to be seen. That just tells you, okay, well, if he's nowhere at 7:30, that's sort of your end point, right? Because then if nobody saw him beyond, you know, whatever, it was 3:30, 4:30, now 7:30, so there's your window. So now you've got this window of time that now you've got to start working it from both ends and start, can we collapse that window to a smaller window and maybe get a better idea of when exactly or whereabouts he was when he went missing? And then was there any series of events that took place at that time that would indicate what possibly happened? You know, the reality is, too, that I know that there's some questions about autopsies and the two autopsies being done. I know one is right now saying there's no confirmed cause of death. But let's say, for argument's sake, let's say it was a drowning. Unlike TV, drownings aren't always this huge event where somebody's screaming, help, help, help. Sometimes a drowning victim will just slips away and nobody notices it.
Can you clarify that for a minute? Because in situations like this, you're dealing with a very specific environment, and there's a back and forth right now about whether Nolan had been drinking and to what extent. In your experience, what do you mean by that? Like, give me a scenario by which this could have been an accidental drowning and no one saw him and no one could have helped him. If we're talking about timelines, we're talking about events, can you imagine a scenario where that would have happened?
About the only, I mean, a scenario that could have happened. The scenario that would come to mind, and I'm not by any means saying this is what happened, but a scenario that would be illogical to that would be he finds himself stuck without a ride. He's a young, healthy, athletic individual. He thinks, hey, man, I'm going to have to swim for it. Gets tired, panics, and drowns. And he's 18 years old. I will tell you that drowning deaths and drowning victims in the United States, that's in that category, that 18 to 24 range. And people always ask, well, why is that? They're young and they're healthy. And that's even people that can swim. But it's also for those of you that can remember when you were 18 years old, you feel pretty invincible. You think, hey, I can do this. That's not that far. I can make it. And unfortunately, a lot of times that's where people get into trouble. And even a healthy, good swimmer can drown. I mean, it doesn't mean just because you can swim and you're athletic doesn't mean you're not susceptible to getting tired and panicking.
Which is one of the reasons I talked about this with Joseph Scott Morgan in our sidebar yesterday, that even if the official state autopsy comes back that this was a result of drowning, do you still have all the pieces of the puzzle? Do you still know exactly what happened? It's so complicated. And look, by the way, going back to that young lady's report, her statement, the Navy's report notes that that statement is potentially useful as a negative observation. They still have to corroborate. They still have to verify it. And Alex, I want to look at something else that has been getting a lot of buzz. We've been building towards this. I want to go to the distress call. Okay, so the one where these young people said the boat was sinking. That audio, very important because it's been a key part of the Friends story. They say the boat was taking on water. That's why they had to leave. The Navy's report says there's no evidence to confirm when that happened. And also significant, the MDMR report, that's the Mississippi Department of Marine Resources, notes that at 4:31, the boat moved at 0.6 to 4.2 knots for nearly an hour before resuming normal operation at 5:25 p.m. So again, we've seen a lot. We've seen video that's come out where it looks like they're getting help and you don't see Nolan on board. There's been back and forth about the audio call. What do you hear in the background? If a boat were really taking on water, what evidence should exist? How does the speed of the boat affect your analysis of this? What should we be thinking about?
Well, I mean, obviously, why is the boat taking on water and otherwise a boat in good working order taking on water? And it could be some logical ones would be damage to the hull would be one way for a boat to take on water. A failed through fitting, which is pulling water into the boat or pushing water out of the boat, i.e. from a bilge pump or something like that. Even though they're normally above the water line, if you're weighted down with a bunch of people, it could be the tow eye got mangled. There's a number of things that could cause a boat to take on water. The speed would then indicate sometimes most boats, if you have power and you are making forward momentum that's forcing the water to the back of the boat, which allows it to run out of, via gravity, run out of like scuppers. So you're better to keep moving to keep that water pouring out the back than to stop and allow water to then overtake the boat itself. And that would also be an indicator of the speed, possibly that they weren't able to go much faster. It could be a number of things could cause that. And we see it a lot. We have boats come in saying, hey, I'm taking on water. They want to blow through a speed zone because they know if they slow down, it's going to overcome their bilge pumps. And so they want to stay on power till either A, they get back to their dock, to their boat lift, or they get to someplace where they can push it up on a beach so that they're not having to salvage the boat later and deal with it that way.
I want to get your opinion on one thing before we wrap up on this. So the Navy report identifies 5 specific problems here that still need to be resolved. According to the report, investigators need to 1, authenticate the last independently corroborated sighting of Nolan, the exact time, location, source, media. 2, authenticate the 3:23 and 4:27 media. Determine whether those times are event times, post times, screen recording times. 3, identify boat X, determine when it left the configuration, where it went, who was on board. 4, authenticate the 4:31 departure using primary electronic data, not just recollection. And 5, create a complete occupant by occupant vessel roster and compare each person's statement against the visual record. And the Navy's report says that until these 5 points are resolved, any narrative claiming certainty about Nolan, what he was doing, his movements, quote, exceeds what the supplied evidence can support. Talk to me about what you think about that. If we're ever going to really be, how you even go about resolving those 5 points of potential uncertainty. And I'm hoping law enforcement is doing it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think those are all valid points. I think the Navy's report, as I said, it does identify 5 points. But I think the I certainly don't think it's anything that the law enforcement investigators aren't already attempting to do. And while I appreciate the input, and as an investigator, I would appreciate the input from the Cajun Navy or somebody who has experience in that, I could assure you that investigators are working on all of those things, to include looking at GPS data from GPS units on the boats, trying to get specific times off of both electronically and witness account and see how much they match up, and are working towards all of those things. But again, I would also stress that you're talking about hundreds of people. Not everybody at that island that day, I'm sure, has come forward to say, like, yeah, I was there. Because there'll be a segment of that group, not necessarily the immediate group, but a group of the revelers at the island that are like, I don't want to be any part of this. Not that they're trying to not, like, they're guilty. I'm just saying they're like, I just don't want to be involved.
Well, with the threats going on and all this attention, right, and the on social media, I wouldn't be surprised by that.
So I think that, and I think that's where we have to, in today's day and age of sort of this instant gratification that we get from, YouTube and the internet, to the painstaking process it takes to build an investigation as sort of wide open as this, with so many moving parts. The family wanting answers. Somebody wants somebody to be blamed for this, and there's a lot of things there, and people want to throw into it things that I don't, in my opinion, don't really think are relevant. Whether that's race, or whether that's, he was this or she was that, or the group is this. There's a lot of, and then you have all of the what I just referred to as the comment section, that just want to fire things out there to be, incendiary, or to get a rise out of somebody. And I think a lot of that stuff starts to muddy the waters. The law enforcement feels pressure from the public. Of course they do, and they should. But they also are trying to do what they can with the information they have and build their investigation.
And that's why the family hired Ben Crump, because of one thing you can say is it brings attention to this, and they were concerned that this was going to be, no foul play, nothing to see here, and they want a thorough investigation. So, by hiring Ben Crump and bringing all this attention to it, there's a lot of eyeballs. Before I let you go, I mean, you just tell me, I know you don't have all the evidence, and I know you're just looking at the reporting like I am. Do you think it points more towards an accident or foul play?
Well, I mean, without having all the information from the autopsy report, so this would be swinging in the dark with a blindfold on. If it is foul play, based on findings in the autopsy and any sort of injuries that he may have sustained, I would hope and I would want those people responsible brought to justice. If the autopsy and the evidence shows that there was no apparent foul play, or there are no injuries to him beyond what looks like a drowning, I want the family to feel confident in the investigation that took place. And those are two very different things to appease, because no family wants to lose a child. And that's a hard thing to reconcile with, and it's a huge grieving process. And for all those out there that are offering content or comments that aren't helping to move this forward, there is a family grieving the loss of their son, and that's tragic. If it was a tragic accident, I want to see the community come together and celebrate this kid's life. He seemed, from all accounts, that he was a wonderful young man who was active in his in his school, with his friends, with his family, and I hope that he's forever remembered for that. And to his family, I offer my deepest condolences, and I hope the investigators find what happened.
100%. And look, we're kind of on a weird timeline, because we don't know how far along the sheriff's investigation is. We don't know when this is going to be presented to a grand jury, but we'll see. We want this family to get closure. We want this family to get answers. It's a really, really upsetting situation. Alex Spear, thanks so much for taking the time. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, Jesse.
And that's all we have for you right now here on Sidebar, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you should get your podcasts. You can also check us out on NBC's Peacock as well. If you want to follow me, X, Instagram, my News Nation show, Jesse Weber Live, Monday through Friday, 11 p.m. Eastern. I'll see you next time, everybody.